All right, and we're live. Let's just finish the final setup. Give me a minute. I'm doing something a little bit different today. Usually, I focus on talking about um, marketing, marketing strategy, business building, offer creation, funnels. My main business, FireCopy.co, is focusing on kind of bringing the subscription model to the agency world, bringing a little unique view. But today I want to talk about something kind of a little bit different, which is really a kind of another big interest of mine. And generally, when I talk to a lot of people about it, people are very interested in it. And I figured I have a little bit of a platform here, so let me share it here. And really, the question is that I like to ponder a lot is the question of what is money. And the reason why I think that's a really important question is that most of us spend 8, 9+ hours a day working for money. And the rest of the time, other than time that we're sleeping, and even sometimes then, we're also spending money. So money in, money out. And I want to kind of break down what is money, and from a product standpoint, right? So I have a background in product development, and that's really kind of one of the questions that I will try to look at something. It's like if you were to design money as a product, right? What are the inputs? What are the outputs? What are the requirements? What would the usage documentation look like to be able to design it? Now, the reason why this is important, I'll kind of break it down like this, and kind of like the background and foundation for everything that I really what started this for me was listening to Robert Breedlove and Michael Saylor a number of years ago. They did a Walloper 18-hour podcast series on basically this question of what is money. And Michael Saylor, who's the CEO of MicroStrategy, a Fortune 500 company, very successful individual, in terms of the way he thinks from first principles. First principles thinking is fascinating, and he basically kind of brings it down like this. He says that everything that happens in the world is about channeling energy, right? And money is no different, right? So if you think about what money is, let's say I'm doing work actually, let's make it even simpler. Let's say I'm building a product for someone. I'm building a car for someone. That's my job. That's my company. I build cars for people, and I go and I build a car, and then I give you the car. And now what the car allows you to do is allows you to go from point A to point B faster, right? So basically, what it's doing is it's taking the energy, or consolidation of allowing you to move at a faster speed than you would without the car. Or let's say if it's a faster, more efficient car, allows you to move there faster while you be able to save money. The idea is that how can we optimize this transfer of energy throughout the entire chain, right? Because what happens is that the person then takes currency, and gives you the money. Now, this money in this kind of moment of transfer is really important because essentially what's happening is money is a battery. Because what you're doing is you're saying, I have provided some type of economic value through some type of exchange of energy, and I need some type of a battery to be able to hold that energy in, to be able to then move that on to the next person. And we obviously break that down to understanding what is someone's net worth. And again, usually in the world reserve currency right now is the U.S. dollar. Let's make this simple in U.S. dollar terms. And if you go back to kind of the way, like, this is not how it used to be. It used to be in a very simple scenario, is that when people would trade, they would basically kind of work out what's the equivalent of something you have and the equivalent in value of something that I have. We make a trade back and forth between each other. That was the very kind of like rudimentary example of how kind of transactions would work. And you can see kind of where the problems will wind up being is that if somebody has a cow and the other person has a chicken, and he wants the chicken, but he's like, well, the cow's not worth the value of the chicken. So if you want to be able to have some kind of way to be able to break down this value of exchange, that's really kind of like an equivalent exchange of what we agree on is a fair value for exchange. If you look at kind of, again, throughout human history, the most common denominator throughout the majority of history really is gold for doing this. And there's other kind of scenarios as well. There is some people don't know this, but the African countries, go back a few hundred thousand, I don't know if it was thousands, but for sure a few hundred years before Africans were enslaved and brought to both to Europe and to and to America, is that they internally they would basically use these special type of beads that were difficult to make, challenging to make, and that was basically the currency that they used amongst themselves in different villages. And when the Europeans came, they saw that this was the beads, that this is what they were using for transacting, and they realized what we can do is we can mass manufacture these in Europe somewhere, come to Africa, we can offload all of these and basically buy up everyone. And the initial slave trade was actually them just buying everyone's stuff from them, right? Because they could just basically, essentially what they're doing is they're flooding the market with currency, and because they're the ones who have the means of production of the currency. It's an important concept, is the owning the means of production for the currency. And essentially what they were able to do is they could, it's like, oh, you need more currency, more currency, and more currency. And that's the African person was like, listen, I only have as much as I have traded with somebody else. And and it's being devalued very quickly. It sounds actually kind of familiar. This is actually what's happening today, with government spending and again, like 2 years ago, no one was talking about inflation. I was talking about inflation because I saw exactly what was happening. Now inflation is part of the day-to-day life, unfortunately. But that's exactly what they were doing. Basically, they're taking the entity that has the ability to create the currency has the ability to inflate away the currency of someone who does not have the ability to do it. Again, that was initially what enabled and allowed for the Europeans to be able to enslave the Africans and take them where they want to do, because they essentially bought them. That's essentially what they did. In the ancient world, that's what slavery was. If I couldn't pay someone, right, I give them over to myself as a slave. That's kind of the initial story of that. In terms of kind of the history of kind of how we evolved to today, which is essentially paper money or not money on a computer. Like, you ever think about like what gives that value? So Yuval Noah Harari says it like this. He says that what gives a currency value is an idea. Because you think about, like, if I give you $1 bill and $100 bill, what is the practical value between those two things, right? There's none other than the ink printed on the paper, right? They both burn exactly the same amount, like in terms of if I was going to use them for something like kindling, right? But one is 100 times the value of the other one, because we've decided that that's the value that it has with somebody else. He said, listen, the biggest terrorists in the world, though, because again, we have a worldwide agreement around what is considered a valuable currency, even the biggest terrorists in the world will still accept and want the US dollar. So that's the power of kind of understanding the idea for it. And kind of the history of it is kind of very interesting. So the history of basically how do we get to where we are today? How do we get to where we are today in terms of the US dollar being the world reserve currency? It kind of goes back to World War One. That's really kind of the first starting point. This is kind of a lot of what I'm in terms of just understanding the source for everything I'm bringing here. Primarily, I got it out of the book by the economist Saifuddin Ammous, who wrote the book The Fiat Standard and the Bitcoin Standard, and he explains something fascinating that happened in World War One. So, if you go back to the time of the British, and Ray Dalio actually talks about this today as well. So if you go back to the time of the British were the pound, and that was the world reserve currency, because they were the ones who were able essentially to collect as much gold as possible in the world. And basically, like, the problem with gold that gold kind of has is that it's a great store of value long term. The problem is it's not so easy to transport and actually do business with day to day. So people would say, hey, I'd rather use a government issued currency that's backed by gold. And then, because it's much easier to move paper around, essentially, particularly if once you're dealing with international transactions. We've been dealing with international transactions now for a number of hundreds of years. Before that, it was much easier when you were kind of living in your local town. But once you started to need to go and do transactions internationally, you can't, like, it's expensive to move gold around the world. So being able to use a government-backed currency that was backed by gold was from a technology standpoint, a much easier option. The problem was as follows, is that even with government issued currency, you don't have control over how much currency they print compared to the gold, particularly compared to what they'll tell you that they're printing. So what happened, really kind of the catalyst for all this was World War One. So Germany World War I was originally only supposed to last about 3 months. They were going to have the battle. It was supposed to be a summer battle. That was it. That's what they were going to be doing. They were going to be having a battle over the course of the summer, and it was going to be over because the cost of war is extremely high. And Germany, unlike the Western allies, had a pure fiat-backed system. And actually, if you want to kind of again go down the rabbit hole, one of the books I highly recommend, the book The Creature from Jekyll Island, because it kind of goes into the details actually how the Weimar Republic was actually kind of the model that was used to create the Federal Reserve. And kind of like I can do a different live about kind of the history of money and pre the Federal Reserve in the United States and how it was a vastly superior system than what we have today. But and actually, what would stop would be all these. Again, there was no recessions during that time. There was no booms and busts. I'll tell you a little story about that in a minute. But just understand kind of the history of what happened because Germany's currency could basically be printed into oblivion. They were able to continue printing their currency and paying their soldiers to continue fighting this war. But even though it was not backed by anything, and even though it wasn't backed by anything, it's not like it happens immediately. The collapse doesn't happen. It took about another 7 to 15 years before the full collapse happened afterwards. And because Germany was able to continue doing this, it forced England to basically create more currency compared to their gold reserves. Let's say, to make this super simple, let's say I have $100 or 100 pounds of currency to a pound of gold. Let's say that was the equivalent. All of a sudden, to be able to devalue my currency, I need to start valuing 200 pounds of currency to a pound of gold, right? So you're doubling the amount. So you have to do that. Now, again, when governments do that, the effect is not immediate. It can take, again, like it can take up to 5 years even before there's a real impact on a major level to be able to make that change. But basically, the World War I forced England to start doing this, and it kept Germany neck and neck with the Allies until the United States entered the war, which kind of threw things over the edge, allowing the West to be able to defeat Germany. But the problem that England had, you ever wonder, well, how did England stop having its world reserve currency status? Basically, England ran into a problem, which was that it now had to basically admit to everybody that it had devalued its currency. And the way they knew that people were going to know about it was all of a sudden when they started going back to selling or exchange foreign exchange rates with other countries' currencies, which were valued in dollars. And all of a sudden, the Swiss, I forget their currency, whatever it's called, whatever the France currency and the Switzerland currency. Were also were devalued against the British dollars. The British dollar Britain started to ask other countries to start devaluing their dollar against gold to basically kind of cover up the fact that their currency had been devalued, and the country or the person that agreed was the Federal Reserve in New York City. That agreed that we'll start printing more currency against our gold reserves to be able to kind of again cover this up. But the idea was that people knew that the British pound was no longer valuable the way it was before, and was stopped being used as the standard for international trade. Now, what's interesting is that a lot of people will look at the Roaring '20s, and then you have the Great Depression as kind of like a pivotal moment in U.S. history. And it was initially really kind of used as an excuse to bring in a lot more social programs, and actually what happened on a money level was kind of interesting. Was that for a number of years, I think like close to 15 years, the U.S. outlawed the ownership of gold, because basically what they did was they said, listen, gold is worth $20 an ounce. Give us your gold, we'll give you $20 in return. As soon as they had, I guess, as much gold as they thought they were going to get, they devalue their currency to $35 an ounce. Now, what's interesting is that most people don't know about this, is that when you have a stable currency, you don't have the boom and bust in the economy that you have when you're running on an Austrian economics model of the economy. For example, most people have never heard of the stock market crash of 1920. The reason most people have never heard of the stock crash of 1920 is that, well, let's put it this way: it was worse in terms of numbers than the stock market crash of 1929. Okay, everyone's heard about that one, right? Because that's what led to the Great Depression. Now the question is, why didn't people know about the crash of 1920, even if, particularly considering it was worse than the market crash of 29? And the reason was that the U.S. dollar was still fully backed by gold and was not being manipulated by the U.S. government or the Federal Reserve at that time. And what happened was, whenever there's a market crash, the market corrects within 6 months. It was back to new all-time highs. So what happened is that after 1920, because of this thing that happened with Britain, the U.S. dollar started to be. This is actually the mechanism that led to the Roaring Twenties. Right, all of a sudden there was a ton of money that was entering the marketplace. People felt very wealthy. People felt very rich. They were spending like crazy. But the problem was it wasn't backed by anything, and that's what led to the crash of 1929. What's the reason why this is important, right, is to understand, like, where does this value come from? This is kind of the story of how we got to government issued fiat currency, because the real problem that the government had, again, this is the idea of, like, you have Keynesian economics here. And just understand, John Keynesian was the ultimate scam artist, because what he did with his model of economics was give the politicians exactly what they wanted. His theory of economics was that in order to have economic growth, money needs to be moving through the economy at all times, and therefore, if money is not moving through the economy at all times, the government needs to create more currency and give it out to people so that more money moves through the economy. The problem with that is that creates inflation. Now, the problem with the Great Depression was that because the dollar was still linked to gold, people stopped spending because they're like, well, why should I spend it? I want to save it because I want to make sure I have purchasing power in the future. I want to make sure I hold on to that in the future. So the U.S. government said, this is the problem. We can't have this because we need to have more control over the economy, over the spending capability of people who are of the economy, and this is how we, quote unquote, stimulate the economy. So again, like I said before, they confiscated gold. They didn't allow people to own gold. They devalued the dollar immediately after they collected all the gold, and didn't allow people to own gold for a number of years because they needed to have that control. When World War II hit, there was an interesting kind of event that happened, which is a lot of the Western European countries were extremely concerned that the Nazis were going to invade and steal their country's gold reserves. So they moved all of their gold reserves to the United States, to Fort Knox, which ideally for safekeeping in case they were invaded by Germany. In 1946, after the end of World War II, they had the Bretton Woods Agreement, which basically said that instead of us returning everyone's gold to them and dealing with the costs and logistics, what we're going to do is we're going to move to a new world reserve currency. Again, at that point, the world had not had a world reserve currency for more than 20 years, which was originally the British pound. And everyone who was basically dealing with cleaning up their economies and societies, because they had been devastated by World War II, said they agreed. And this then led to a kickoff of about 20 years of extreme prosperity in the United States and the world. And what most people don't realize, though, is that one of the mechanisms that really again, which launches, is the printing of money. Right? There's a reason why the U.S. has not won a war since World War II. The goal is not to win wars. The goal is to be in wars, because it allows the government to have an excuse to print money that will then be sent over to the military-industrial complex, and this allows them to continue doing this. This is why in Vietnam, let's take a step back here. With Vietnam, the Vietnam War was very interesting, because the Vietnam War was kind of the first real example of the U.S. government overstepping its bound in terms of money printing. And to understand the impact of this, it was in the late 60s that the U.S. ran into a problem, which is that the U.S. dollar started to be extremely devalued, so much so which the other Western countries, which at this point had rebuilt their economies, were starting to ask questions. And it was France that famously said, we want our gold back. And in fact, they sent a destroyer to attack New York City if the U.S. did not return its gold reserves to them in 1971. And this is the point where Richard Nixon took the United States off he severed the link of the U.S. dollar to gold. So that's it. The U.S. dollar we can print as much dollars as we want. And because we no longer are tied down to the need that we have gold reserve, we have trained people to accept this as currency. We can now then start to give everyone who asks for it their gold reserves back. Now, I literally yesterday saw on Twitter, I've seen this in the past, but I literally just commented on it yesterday, which is someone showed that exactly that point in 1971. Actually, you know what? While I'm doing this, let's see if I can find it. Because here, Twitter, it's a really good example because a lot of people, when they look at politics, they think it's a Republican versus Democrat issue, a right versus left issue. It's not. It's not. That entire game is a distraction from what actually happens, which is really the idea that we want to be able to have an excuse by the government to continue printing money in order to be able to continue stimulating the economy. Here, let me find it. Let me just go to my, guys, got to go to my name here. So let me share my screen. And I will show this to you. Why is this not opening up? I want to see my name. Share screen. Share screen. Replies. Here we go. So this is actually it exactly. Okay. So look at what happened right here. Right? Someone asked this question. WTF? What the fuck happened in 1971? I just explained to you what happened in 1971. This is the severing of the link of gold from fiat currency. And what basically this did was this allowed the U.S. government to basically start printing money. And the question is, who's the first person to get the money? Because the first person to get the money is the person who's going to be able to start investing this in capital and buying things and etc. This is the idea that a lot of companies have. They receive grants from the government. They'll buy back their own stock. So stock prices start to go up in price, not because of any necessarily type of increase in productivity for the company, but because they're actually getting this fiat money to be able to create the illusion of doing this. But again, what happened right here, where you can see productivity and compensation was essentially neck and neck for, 10, 20, 25 years, right? Compensation has barely increased during that time period, whereas productivity is 2.5x. Again, the reason for that is because the fiat money system basically speeds up work and speeds up the world essentially, and this is the result of that over time, because people, when they're saving in their local currency, they're no longer able to save long term. Right, so they have basically, because they have to spend it because their money is going down in value, and most people don't realize that. Like before 1971, you could put your currency into a local bank account and it would generate a yield that would exceed inflation. The problem is that it doesn't really kind of work that way today, and I'm reading Seyfried Amos's the Fiat Standard right now, and he said something wild in there. He said basically, like, again, it used to be you could hold your money in the bank account and generate a yield. And then eventually, you were able to hold it in bonds. And this was up and through the 90s, early 2000s. The only thing that's really left, according to like the mainstream financial world, where you can actually hold your money and save it against inflation, is stocks and real estate. Those are essentially the only two mainstream vehicles left to be able to do such a thing. Just because you need to have something that's going to be having yield or increasing in value faster than inflation. So I hope it's kind of really going to give us a background to understand, like, the background of how we got to the point today where we're issuing and using government issued currency. Like, it's basically been again, we all work 8-9 hours a day to get a paycheck, to get money from clients, as a way, again, as a way to just to compensate or really, what's the word? Like, Vivek Ramaswamy said something I thought was fascinating from a persuasion standpoint in his campaign, where he said he wants to change. I think good luck to him. Like, I have no idea. Like, not that I have no idea. I highly doubt he'll be able to do anything about the Federal Reserve. He said he wants the Federal Reserve to not have the mandate anymore of, which was it, maximum employment and I think stable prices. I think it's something like that. He's like, really, the U.S. dollar just needs to be a stable unit of measure. That's all it needs to be. Once you go beyond that, like, all of a sudden now you're trying to, like, you're not in a free market anymore. You're in a government manipulated market, because they start playing these games. We see like the recession that we're in right now was actively caused by the government. First, they printed too much money, and then they raised rates too much, made the cost of money too expensive, as opposed to like the real free market, and the real democracy really is the individual person on the millions of interactions that happen every single day, deciding where do I want to put my money, where do I want to put my capital. If you have an entity that's trying to control things, this is not free market capitalism. What it is, I don't know. I'm not going to go as far to say that it's communism, but it is not. It's not. It's not a free market because again, they're changing. Like most people think when they think of a currency, they think of the U.S. dollar. This is the denominator for value. And therefore, all the activity I do, this is the value for my service, the value for my price, right? This is the numerator on top of this constant denominator, which is whatever the value is that we agree the U.S. dollar is. Again, if you go back, the average home price in the United States today is something like $400,000. If you go back to 1971, what we just showed, the average home price in the United States was $25,000. Okay, that's how much the currency has been devalued over the past 50 years. Right, that's a crazy number. That's like 85%. That's crazy. This is why it's really important to understand this. So again, I'm not saying to stop charging in whatever currency, because most people that's the currency that we do business in. But the question is for you personally to be able to think about like what can I do to be able to kind of hold purchasing power long term. This is why building wealth is incredibly important. Holding assets are incredible. I'll tell you the problem also with a lot of assets. Again, I was talking about kind of this evolution from savings accounts to bonds to real estate and stocks. The problem with let's say stocks particularly is that the general guidance that the stock market or the S&P 500 goes up on average of 8% per year. Therefore, theoretically, that means your wealth is increasing faster than the speed of inflation. Now, here's the problem with that, is that 8%, even though they say it's 2%, 8% is really the more accurate inflation number. By looking at I'll tell you why. Here's the mechanics of how it works. I actually sat down with my son. He's 12 years old, and he figured this out. And he did this by just looking online to see how does the Federal Reserve calculate inflation. And the way they calculate inflation is they take this basket, what they call a basket of goods. And that basket of goods doesn't include two very, very important things. It doesn't include the price of housing, and it doesn't include fuel, right? And these are two things that are very much driven by the state of the economy, particularly housing, right? So also you take that out. If you were to put housing back in, your inflation rate is well above 2%, 3%, 4%, 5%, right? Whatever the price of housing is, it's closer to 20%. That's the more accurate inflation number. Is really close to 15-20%. This is actually one of the things Michael Saylor talked about that really got him into exploring all this, is that when COVID hit and they started printing all this money, he has a huge company. They have, it's not just the operating cash that they're dealing with, they have a large treasury, and they're like, how do we hold on to this value long term, right? According to the real inflation numbers, not the government issue. I always had an issue with this. Is like the government's going to basically get a grade that they define how the grading works. Like this doesn't make any sense to me. It doesn't make any sense to me. Like they're saying, okay, fine. This is our inflation numbers. This shows how well we're doing as a country and on our how well the government's doing, and we're also going to define how we grade this number. Right. Watch, by the way, I'm already seeing it. Watch, they're going to reset the inflation target rate somewhere between 3 to 4% in the next year instead of 2%. They're going to say right now our target is 2% inflation. First of all, why? Because you decided it. Literally, it was pulled out of a hat. That's a made up number. Really, what that number means is that they're saying we want to be able to continue printing money. Okay, now's where I'm going to get a bit more extreme. This is the point, because we're half an hour into this. No one's going to watch this part of the presentation. Is they are going to print money regardless of what happens, but they need to print it at a slow enough rate that people don't think that their currency is being devalued. So 2% is their target for that reason. So therefore, all they have to do to change that number, because they can't get it under control, is just change their target. As it is, they're already changing the number, because what they'll do is they'll look at this, what they call the CPI, the basket of goods, and they'll say, oh, it went up this month because and people are buying less meat. So what we're going to do is we're going to take meat out, and we're going to say, instead of meat, everyone's just buying chicken. Oh, look, the thing magically goes down in price when we do that. So therefore, we're going to reset and give what our inflation number is. Like, when again, we're talking about numerators, denominators, constants, right? If you have the ability to change your constant, there's no constant in terms of what you're comparing to. You can basically make up anything you want, right? This is also just, again, how governments lie to us. So this is, I think this is why, and here's the problem. It always comes back to this. Because governments control the money supply, the money is the most important export of any country, right? Particularly the United States. The United States' biggest export is debt, right? It's dollars, because particularly as the world continues to need to use oil, right? Right now, at least, again, there was news today that literally might change everything. Well, there was news today that said that BRICS, right, which is the organization equivalent to the G7 of Brazil, India, China, Russia, South America, are going to be accepting 5 or 6 new countries, including Saudi Arabia and Iran. Now, Saudi Arabia particularly is the key one, because they're the ones that basically established for the past, 75 plus year, I don't know when it started exactly, that worldwide oil will be priced in dollars. One of the things they're also talking about this BRICS summit is changing how they do international trade with each other to get off the U.S. dollar. And why is this important? Is because if I'm China and I want to buy oil from Saudi Arabia, and I can only buy in dollars, I need to go basically buy dollars from the United States to be able to do business there. If all of a sudden they're going to say, oh no, we're going to accept the yuan for our transaction, all of a sudden I have no longer a need for the U.S. dollar. And all of a sudden, all of this currency that's in the marketplace, 30% of it is no longer needed. What's going to happen? You now have this is a basic supply and demand. The cost or value of money is going to go down like crazy, right? And people's purchasing power will be worth significantly less. So this is why, again, it's truly important to buy assets. I will say that I think crypto is a massive opportunity for this, because one of the things that particularly about crypto that's very when I say crypto, I mean specifically Bitcoin. The rest of crypto is a question, even though I do have some investments in some other altcoins. Bitcoin is really the core, because there is no issuer. There's no governmental ability to really touch it, unlike other people, just because there's no CEO. Like even something like Cardano, which I'm very bullish on generally, there is a face of the organization they can pull in front of Congress and they can fine. But you can't do that with Bitcoin. But the reason why this is so important is that Bitcoin is something that you can now take. Let's say I'll give you a story. My grandparents both grew up during that Great Depression, and they bought a farm in Michigan. And I remember them telling me this. This is like, my modern sensibility is thinking this is crazy. They said the reason they bought it was because they needed to make sure that no matter what happened with the world again, they had the ability to grow food. And in terms of thinking about like what the value of something is, in terms of being able to hold on to your purchasing power, I saw last year when the war in Ukraine started, you had Ukrainians who were leaving, and I remember one of the most chilling posts that I saw was someone saying, "I managed to get out. I think he said he was in Uzbekistan. I have lost everything. I lost my home. I lost my business. Lost everything. The only thing I have of value left is my Bitcoin and my Ethereum, right? Because that's the real benefit, is that you have the ability to take it with you wherever you need to go, in case of a disaster, and no one can stop you, right? Again, try to bring $100,000 of gold through an airport, forget them stopping you. They will confiscate it from you, right? And all they have to do is just take it from you, and there's nothing you can do about it, right? Same thing with real estate. You can't take real estate with you, and real estate's taxed to no end, right? This is something you can literally hold it. And a 16-phrase password in your head. This is the value that it's worth. And it happens to be also, I can get into, I'm not going to do it now because this is a whole other talk, but like basically breaking down the five components. Again, when I said if I was going to add my product hat to this, the 5 components of what makes sound of money, how many Bitcoin hits all 5. Whereas let's say if you look at gold, you look at fiat, they hit 4. But the problem, but the one they're missing is the opposite of each other. So they kind of very intertwined, as opposed to you have one just by itself. Let's see if I can actually, I'll mention it. I'll see if I can rattle them all off. So it has to be easily divisible, right? So, which is something that you can't really do so well with gold. This is why they would make like gold coins that were supposed to be equivalent to a certain amount. But the problem was that then governments, the Roman Empire, started basically diluting the gold in there to just say, oh, this is a 1 ounce coin, but really it's 0.75 ounces of gold. And we put some other metal in there as well. So that it's divisibility, it's ability to be what's the word, confirmed, right? There's a better way of saying that. Not counterfeit, essentially, right? So gold, there's a way to check that. U.S. currency, there's a way to check that. Bitcoin, there's a way to check that, right? That's not right. Something you want to be able to eat, make it needs to be portable, right? Like I can't go and buy my groceries with a house, like that's ridiculous. The house is going to be where it is. If I want it, I have to go sell the house in exchange for currency to go buy it in the grocery store. So I need to be able to do that. That's number 3. I don't remember the last 2 off the top of my head, but like you see where I'm going with this, like in terms of the 5 components of what would make up sound money. This is why it's super important. So basically, the bottom line is this, right? So everything I've just said, I'm kind of giving the history, and I'm not knocking it as a bad thing. I think obviously the system has allowed for this system works really well in the industrial age. In the industrial age, which we've experienced for the past 100 years, this is actually a really, really good system to create prosperity worldwide for something like this. The problem is that as we move into the digital and the exponential age, it's an old system that is not going to work for people anymore, and we see it. We see the foundation cracking. Even people like Donald Trump, who are pushing forward getting rid of regulation, opening up production in society. That's not going to ultimately save the society. It will be better for sure in the short term, just because we're going to take off some of the restrictions on the economy. But again, if the government didn't have control of the money, they wouldn't have the ability to control the economy this way. So if there was some way to be able to take control of the money away from government, right, make money a free market product, then everything's going to change. All of a sudden, people talk about entitlements, right? We need the government needs to collect taxes to be able to then distribute it to people who have some type of need that we've decided that they needed. And the problem with that is that, again, if the government doesn't have the ability to collect taxes from you, or doesn't have the ability to print money for one of these programs, then they have to convince you to give your money to them, right? And as opposed to just doing it, right? They're either forced or through just deciding they're going to do it to begin with. And if you have a free market product that goes up and that uses money that goes up in value, imagine again going back to the time when there was a gold standard. You put $100 in your account, and all of a sudden, then in a year, so we're worth $120, just because the limit of supply is limited, right? And it's capped, right? You're going to be a lot more efficient in your spending, which means that even if someone's poor and they hold on to this money, right, they'll have a lot more purchasing power later on as well, as opposed to constantly getting diluted money from the government. All right, I have gone way too long, a little much longer than I was expecting. If you do want to watching this all the way to the end, I would love to hear your thoughts on this. Would like to also feel free to call me out on any of this stuff. But I really, really think that understanding money is super important in terms of being able to just really understand the direction to take your own personal life and your family life and your business ultimately, and to understand kind of the games that are being played with the money. Because right now, when people don't see, it's like a fish out of water type moment. When you don't see it, like Raoul Paul had a great line where he's like, people know they're being screwed, they just don't understand how, right? So this is why this is super important. So we'd love to hear your feedback. And if you and also please share this with other people that you think that it might be valuable for. So love to hear your comments and feedback, and I will talk to you later. Bye.